earlier this week, we talked about with Michael some new or younger NFL head coaches in their first, second years with teams and how they can elevate their teams, right? Well, another angle to this, I think, is when you see a team bring in a new coordinator, and there are a number of new coordinators with new teams this year. And before we get into some of the coaches in different spots in 2023, from your experience, like, was there ever a coordinator that came in that really made a big difference for a team you were on?
Absolutely. I mean, it's night and day sometimes, really, Stormy, in terms of what you're trying to do or what you're doing. The night and day situation was in Seattle when we're going from essentially what the Miami Hurricanes offense was back in their heyday with Dennis Erickson. And, a lot of things you do in college doesn't necessarily translate to the National Football League, especially back then. And I'll give you a prime example. So we could have a certain route concept called, but then if there was a blitz look, we had all these checks to go through to kind of pick it up and make sure that the quarterback was protected. But then, problems will still arise. Like, well, coach, what if this happened? What if that safety did this? And like, oh, I didn't think about that. Let's go back and watch the tape and then we'll figure that out. That kind of thing. That's subpar performance though, right? Well, if you're Mike Holmgren and, you've won a Super Bowl and you got the system that you're highly familiar with, speaking of the West Coast offense, if there's a problem on the field, it's built in. Well, coach, what if this happens or if we get this look? Oh, it's built in. In other words, don't worry about it. We got it. It's covered. And so there's a confidence level out there. And I think there's a number of teams that can kind of distinguish themselves that way. Which teams are playing with a lot of confidence and which teams are still messing with protections and schemes to try to protect the quarterback. You can identify that as better.
That's interesting because, sometimes as somebody from the outside looking in, I wonder, like, are we looking into this too much? Are we making too much of a coaching change here or a personnel change here? But no, it really can make a difference, especially from a confidence standpoint.
1,000%. You can see the different speeds that teams are playing with offensively when they know what they're doing, as opposed to kind of thinking. Same thing with defense. One of the things that I look for during the season is, are these players comfortable? I go back to being comfortable in your environment. And so a lot of times the coaches can provide that comfort just based on their experience and credibility that they have to calling plays. And certainly as you get through a week of practice, are you comfortable with the game plan? And those are the things from insiders, I'll read and maybe try to tap into some insiders in terms of trying to see some information or, just understanding the track record of some of these coordinators out there providing that comfort for their players.
Well, let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Is there a new offensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator rather that's in a new home that you feel is poised to make an impact on their team this year?
Well, I think so. Here's where it gets interesting. Like, you look at Kellen Moore, he's got Justin Herbert. How are you going to mess that up? Right? You better not. You better not. You better not mess that up. Nathaniel Hackett, that's going to be better than it was in Denver because he's back with Aaron Rodgers, right? And
I think some coaches are probably just better poised to be a coordinator than a head coach, right? Maybe he's one of those guys.
Because of comfort. Yeah, like, I'd rather call plays, and Aaron Rodgers, we're on the same page. He knows what I'm thinking. I know what he's thinking, and everything's comfortable and it's a fit. Right. You're exactly 1,000% right. I think Steve Wilks is a great defensive coordinator, but is he DeMeco Ryans with that roster? DeMeco had some impact with those players, right? And as a former player himself and closer to the age group of those defenders out there in San Francisco, that was a different relationship than it's going to be with Wilks.
Well, now you got me thinking Steve Wilks, don't mess it up.
Don't mess it up.
Don't mess it up.
You better not mess that up. Vic Fangio.
I like Steve Wilks,
right.
I will say, I am a fan.
Vic Fangio, like there's an age gap. Vic Fangio was a linebackers coach when I was playing in the league. And so, but the players have a way of communicating and embracing Vic Fangio. He's got a way with players that is uncanny, and he certainly gets a lot of production from his players. So I'm looking for that to be great. I know maybe some friction with Jim Schwartz. You going from Joe Woods, who's highly distracted player or defensive coordinator, to Jim Schwartz as a defensive coordinator. I don't know how that's going to work. Just based on paper, and the relationships or the track record of a Jim Schwartz as a defensive coordinator. Is he going to win over those players on that side of the ball? Eric Bieniemy is already winning over players out there in Washington. Jahan Dotson, Bieniemy's bringing a culture to the Commanders, right? It's a freshness. And it's also credibility because Eric's won a couple Super Bowls out there from Kansas City.
He was somebody I was very specifically wondering your opinion about because, yes, won a couple of Super Bowls in Kansas City, yet Andy Reid is given the credit for those, and he hasn't gotten the head coaching opportunities largely because of that. So this is his shot to go off on his own. I'm curious what's going to happen at the quarterback position, especially with the Commanders, because we have Ron Rivera coming out saying, hey, Sam Howell, he's going to get the first shot, but actually we're talking about him and Jacoby Brissett about the same here so far to start the season. So is he going to be able to get the most out of the quarterbacks? I think that's going to be really, really important for the Commanders, but this is a proving ground and a big, big opportunity, I think, for Eric Bieniemy if he takes advantage.
Right. I mean, he's an assistant head coach out there too, so he's got a title. But the thing about Eric, Stormy, is Andy Reid does get the credit. You look at the offenses, but Andy Reid's from that system in which the coordinator, and Eric's part of this too, the coordinator comes up with the game plan. The play caller, a lot of times Andy Reid will nix a play or not nix a play, but certainly throughout the course of a game, Eric's calling those plays in Kansas City, and then certain phases or certain elements of the game, Andy Reid would call it. But this is going to be Eric's show out there in Washington. And you're right, though. It's a different quarterback situation that he's dealing with there. So I know a lot of people are excited about it, excited about the scheme, but can that quarterback or a quarterback out there in Washington?
He didn't have to worry about a dang quarterback thing with Patrick Mahomes.
I said a quarterback because I think it's neck and neck between Brissett and this other guy,
Sam Howell out of UNC. One name that we haven't even mentioned yet, Bill O'Brien. You feel like that's going to be an automatic upgrade from having a defensive coach running your offense in New England, and somebody that you would hope that Mac Jones can develop a good relationship with their Alabama roots.
That's the key, right? I mean, O'Brien is experienced, certainly calling the plays, but he runs hot too. Is Joe Judge still going to be the quarterback's coach? I'm curious about that. Because that coach runs hot. We know he got into fights with his own coaching staff out there in New York when he was a head coach. That's not good for a quarterback to have two people involved in the offense that run that hot. A lot of times a coordinator has to be a counselor too. I mean, they have to understand what this quarterback's going through out there on the field with 10 other players and then a defense. And, the emotional roller coaster of all of that. If you are so ardent about what you're doing and, okay, my system, you need to execute, then it's not going to work with a guy like Mac Jones because we saw him lose his poise last year.
So it looks like it will be O'Brien that is handling the quarterback specifically as well. Okay. But you wonder if Judge is still going to have a hand in things. Obviously, Todd. He's listed as an offensive assistant that our guy Elliot behind the glass tells us. Todd Monken, do you really believe that the Ravens are going to become more pass heavy in their approach?
Well, that's a relationship to watch because this is completely different for Lamar Jackson now. When you're dealing with a guy who kind of catered the offense, you worked with the offense coordinator. His name's escaping me, but he worked with Colin Kaepernick and. Now he's moved on, so here comes Monken, and everything's going to be kind of different for Lamar Jackson. So that's a relationship I'm going to have to keep an eye on because I don't know where that's going to go. Obviously, the Ravens explored moving on from Lamar. That's why they let him even though they franchise tagged him, he still could have signed with somebody else, especially a player at his level. That didn't happen, so they welcome him back. They give him a contract. So that relationship, they're going to have to forge a relationship out there in Baltimore right now. And
another new coordinator, Brian Flores, there with the Minnesota Vikings. Yeah. We talked earlier that Vikings defense couldn't get a whole lot worse. So hopefully Flores can step in and get the ship righted, as they say.
Oh, they're going from a 4-3 to a 3-4, and I don't know if they have the same personnel or the right personnel for that right now as they're making moves even this late in the offseason.
It's going to be an interesting season for the Vikings. I have a lot of questions, that's for sure. Yeah. But I still lean over that 8.5 win total. What can I say?
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.